to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we're doing on Thursday evening. I apologize. I forgot my mic. It's my fault. I'm sorry my sound is bad. And we're doing another podcast tomorrow night. It's going to sound bad on that one too. So just get ready for it. My fault. Joining me from about 80 blocks up Manhattan is Tim Bontemps.
More importantly, how's your chair?
My chair is fine. Very average. Bontemps was in Boston today for the Kristaps Porzingis press conference. It was the most important thing that happened. I hope you enjoyed it.
We may talk about that in the next hour. We'll see.
Joining us from Dallas, Texas, Stan MacMahon.
Howdy, partners.
How's your theme song?
Got to negotiate that one.
A lot of negotiating going on these days.
Going to fire my agent if we don't get it on the next pod.
All right. So we got ourselves a circus in the NBA. It seems like it happens every free agency period, and we got it. James Harden opts into his contract with the Philadelphia 76ers, which indicates, as Woj has reported, that he would like a trade. We'll find out. There's some haze out there from the different sides as we're in the thick of this right now. We'll find out how much serious negotiating went on. But at the end of the day, what the 76ers were offering or willing to offer James Harden for opting out and entering in a new contract was obviously unpalatable to him. Whether the offer was not long enough, not high enough, not complete enough, whatever it was, he didn't like it. And, the thing about it is if he became a free agent and he opted out of his contract, which a lot of us assumed, expected that he would do, his options were really narrow because you could only sign with teams with cap space, or you could engineer a sign and trade. And you can apply pressure to the Sixers on a sign and trade, but a lot of teams, because of their salary cap position, can't do a sign and trade. If you opt into your contract and have that was a $36.5 million, then you can go to any team as long as the teams can do a trade. There's no, some teams still have some cap issues, but there's nobody who's going to be forbidden from doing it. And nobody, and I mean nobody, demands trades like James Harden. This is the man's third trade request in, I believe, less than 3 years. So I know that Philadelphia may want to hold its cards close to its vest and may not want to acquiesce, because at the end of the day, I could see somebody saying, oh, he opted in for $36.5 million. Sounds good to us. We'll see you in the fall. But that's not the way Harden's going to play this. And MacMahon, you went through this at Houston. When James Harden wants to be moved from somewhere, he'll find a way to get moved from somewhere. And so I think he's played his last game for the 76ers. And now it's a matter of how is this going to work out?
Well, at the bare minimum, he's played hard his last game for the 76ers. I think you can ask the Rockets how that works out. You remember when it was mid-pandemic, and he spent the start of training camp partying in Atlanta and Vegas with little baby, among others. He did come back in the opener, lit it up for 44 and 17, kind of one of those, hey, just so you know, I can still play if I want to. And then the rest of his time was, but I don't want to in Houston anymore. Same thing happened in Brooklyn. And, it's interesting because for months and months and months, we thought this was going to come down to, hey, is he going to go back to Houston, or is he going to decide to stay in Philly? And it certainly sounds like without any kind of contact that would be illegal, it became clear to him that the Rockets aren't putting the kind of deal on the table that he wanted either. And so then all the smoke was, okay, he's going back to Philly, and apparently he didn't get it there either. And so Harden made a calculated bet last year, in part to give the Sixers more salary cap space, but also knowing, hey, I'm going to become a free agent. I'll get the rest of my money a year later, and that's not the way this is working out. And so he'll pack his bags once again, and likely off to the West Coast he goes.
Well, I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, this entire thing is just about leverage and who has it and who doesn't. And I think what's been very clear throughout this entire process is James Harden has none. And that's where we're at. Because opting into this deal is the best outcome the Sixers could have had. Because now you could trade him anywhere. Mm-hmm. You're not in a threat of him leaving for nothing.
Right.
And he is now you have control of the entire situation. If James Harden had opted out, in theory, he would have had some ability to try to go out and find a deal and maybe make something happen. But the fact that he opted in, to your point, MacMahon, it's a sign that, certainly indications are Houston's going elsewhere with their money at point guard. I think everybody can make an educated guess about what that's going to be. And so then he had no offers on the table. He had no ability to get somewhere.
Don't make an educated guess. It looks like Fred VanVleet is the Rockets' number one.
I was just having a little fun with it.
And maybe they'll get it done and maybe they won't, but it's not James Harden.
Right. And also key to that is it looks like it'll be VanVleet on a 2-year deal. Now, a 2-year deal, perhaps at the max, which is above his reasonable market value. But the key there is a 2-year deal where obviously Harden was looking more of a long-term commitment.
Well, and either way, the money's gone for whatever the year. So It was 1 year, right? The money's off the board. And if you look around, okay, where's he getting the money? There's nowhere to get the money. So if you opt out, then you at least have a position to maybe negotiate with the Sixers. Maybe you find something else. Now that he's opted in, I know everybody's going to talk about all these places James Harden's going to get traded. And, you can go to the Clippers for this or go to the Knicks for that or whatever. Adrian mentioned those two teams today. That's why I said them. But the Sixers are in charge of this deal. And if I think they have the ability to play this thing out. And as we saw Daryl Morey do with the Ben Simmons thing a couple of years ago, he is not going to have any problem waiting to do something until he thinks it's in his best interest to make a deal. He's not just going to make one to make a bad one in 2 minutes.
I will say this, to my knowledge, Daryl Morey has never owned a single Ben Simmons t-shirt. I know for a fact I have seen the man wear multiple James Harden t-shirts. I cannot confirm this because I've never been invited to Daryl Morey's home, but I've heard that there's a beautiful commissioned portrait of James Harden hanging prominently in the Morey home. So this is a little bit of a different situation.
It's a little.
That's part of the shock that it's gotten to this point. Like you never thought Morey and Harden would have this kind of breakup.
Well, but this is the thing. The reason we're in this situation is because there was no team for the Sixers to bid against, right? Like James Harden was frustrated. He wasn't getting the kind of offer he was getting. Well, how do you get offers, right? You have competing offers. When you have competing offers, the numbers go up and then you get to a point where you want to get to. With Houston off the board and you don't have Philly versus Houston anymore, there's just not a secondary team that you could look at and say, that's a real threat to go get James Harden to then draw Philly's offer up.
Well, the other way to get offers is if it's going to hurt a team so badly that they lose you and they're afraid that you're going to feel disrespected and be disgruntled if they keep you at a lower number, then that might drive the offer up. But we'll touch on Kyrie later.
Well, I was just going
to say something real quick.
Yeah.
2 years ago, 2021 season, 2021 season, 2021.
It was the 2021 season.
What are you trying to say?
You're talking about when Harden forced his way out of Houston.
No, sorry.
Okay.
Before the 2021-22 season.
Okay.
Kevin Durant signed a $200 million extension with the Brooklyn Nets. And the Nets had every intention to match his extension with James Harden and Kyrie Irving. Mm-hmm. They could have signed with the Nets for, I think it was 4 years at the time, because they had a year left on their contracts.
Yep.
They could have signed, I think it was in the neighborhood of $180 million over 4 years. They did not. And when these 4 years are calculated, it's going to be interesting to see how much money they lost. Now, maybe James Harden would say, I don't care how much money I lost. I wasn't happy in Brooklyn, and I'm glad I'm out. And maybe he'll end up someplace next year, and it'll be glorious, and he'll be happy. He'll get a new contract and everything. Kyrie Irving may say the exact same thing. We haven't seen the end of those 4 years yet. But not good, guys. Not good since they decided not to do that. And they're both kind of in the same boat. I don't think either of them have a real market. And I think it's interesting. The only difference is Kyrie doesn't have an option to opt into. It's very interesting to see the way that, as you mentioned, Daryl Morey, who's built a significant part of his career around James Harden, played hardball here.
Well, I don't even know if he played. I don't even know if it's fair to say he played hardball, because there's nothing to really play hardball with if there's not another offer.
Well,
that's the thing.
Listen, no, that's not fair to say, because when they made the deal for Harden, a lot of the discussion and the evaluation of that trade, which I still think was a win because you got off of Ben Simmons' contract.
Absolutely.
But a lot of the discussion was, hey, now you're going to give Harden what might end up being one of the worst contracts in the NBA because of the way he's going to age, et cetera, et cetera. He never gave Harden that contract.
Yep.
He somehow convinced Harden to take a pay cut, right?
Well, let's stop on that. Let's stop on that for a second, just real quick. We've talked about this ever since last year, right? They got Harden to take a pay cut, right? Maybe there wasn't the biggest market for James Harden a year ago either, right?
But still, you convinced the man to take a pay cut and to be happy about it and to tell everybody how much he sacrificed.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he never Harden. We all, I'm not going to say anticipated, but thought it was a very legitimate possibility that at some point Harden was going to get that $200 million contract from the Sixers. That never happened. He never even got a $100 million contract from the Sixers. So in that sense, yeah, I think it is safe to say, or fair to say, that Morey's played hardball.
I guess what I would say
Moneyball.
I guess what I would say though is that it's just, to me, a sign of how limited James's market actually is. In that, like Daryl could have just said, yeah, James, we're going to give you the max just to be great. But if Houston was sitting there offering, let's just say the max for 3 years to James Harden, right? And he could walk out the door for nothing. Well, then I think Philly probably would have been offering more money because it would have really hurt them to just have him walk out the door. But there was no other offer. So it's you could say it, I guess maybe it's a semantical argument, but to me, what's interesting about this is we spent all year talking about what's James Harden going to do? Is he going to go back to Houston? Is he going to stay in Philly? What's he going to do? And ultimately, it feels like it was a game of ring around the rosy, and he didn't have a chair. And he's just sort of standing there. He's like, well, what do I do? Well, I guess I'll opt into this deal to make sure I have something. And then maybe I can force my way somewhere else.
I think, are you implying that you think that the Sixers didn't want to sign him at all?
I think James Harden was, my read of it is James Harden thought there was going to be a bidding war for his services. And instead, there was not. And the Sixers didn't just step up and offer him the deal he wanted without anybody else trying.
That's called hardball.
I guess what I would say, I think it's more interesting in a different frame of it to say you could say that he just didn't hand him all the money, but there's also nobody else that's even in the ballpark on it.
Yes, but that happens every day in the NBA, including yesterday when Nikola Vucevic got 3 years and $60 million when nobody was going to bid for that.
Well, but that's
and we're talking about. I mean, that is the situation that the Mavericks are in with Kyrie, and I think that Kyrie, I don't know that he gets full max. The Mavericks are trying to protect their mid-level, which they can't go full max on that. But I think he's going to get more than the 35.6, 36, whatever it is that Harden opted in on. I'll tell you that. I think the first-year starting salary will begin with a 4.
Well, let's look at that situation too, right? Dallas.
Actually, hold on, though. I do want to touch on first, staying on
Sure.
on Harden and Philly. Because let's be honest, the thing here now is there's a ton of pressure on Daryl Morey, because it's not just like you got James Harden try to win a championship with Joel Embiid. And we've been talking about this for a while. If you don't have a chance to win a championship with Joel Embiid, at what point does he look around and say, well, damn, maybe I need to get somewhere else?
Embiid is a big variable here. How Embiid reacts and wants to have some sort of reaction from the team is going to be very relevant. And
I suspect Joel is going to sit back and watch it play out.
More Hoop Collective podcast after this.
Did you know YouTube TV is more than cable for less than cable? That's right. YouTube TV has no long-term contracts or hidden fees, and it even lets you catch up to the live game with key plays. This is an excellent feature. I don't even know how they do it, but it's excellent. I highly recommend it. With a lineup of over 100 channels, you can watch live TV just like cable. Signing up is simple. Get started in minutes. So what are you waiting for? Try it free today at youtube.com/NBA23. New users only. Terms apply. Cancel anytime. Baseball is back. Get your ballpark on with tickets from Vivid Seats, or enjoy hockey and baseball in all their glory with courtside seats. Whoever you're rooting for, there's nothing like the thrill of seeing your favorite team live. Vivid Seats, the official ticketing partner of ESPN, is offering you $20 off your first $200 ticket purchase with code HOOP. That's code HOOP. Download the app or visit vividseats.com today. Vivid Seats. Life happens live.
Let's talk about how can Daryl, deal with this situation in a way that still puts Philly in a position with the reigning MVP to have a chance to contend.
Well, to me, like I said before, if your options were, say, a week ago, right? Your options were James Harden opts out and leaves, James Harden opts out and you pay him a bunch of money, or James Harden opts in. I think this is by far the best option, because worst case scenario, you have to deal with him next year on your team, and he might be kind of disgruntled. Okay,
that's a bad scenario. At this point, that would be a bad scenario.
I said it's the worst case scenario. I'm not saying it's what I would want, but I do think on some level, if he doesn't have anybody step up with any kind of offer to trade for him, at some point you would have to think he would sit there at this point and say, I got to try to earn money next summer, even if he doesn't want to be in Philly at all. So I think that
will be true. No.
Okay, I don't.
Two different times he shut down in mid-season.
He's also 35 now, going to be whatever. I'm just saying, that's the worst case. We're getting bogged down in the worst case scenario. I don't think it's happening either. But you have teams now that can trade for James Harden, like, say, the Clippers. Obviously, they're the team that's already come up the most. The Clippers don't have any other way to get better, right? The Clippers are stuck. That's the kind of team, like Dallas with the Kyrie trade, though it's obviously very different circumstances, where the Clippers might trade extra stuff to get James Harden because they don't have any way to get a player like James Harden in the door, and they're kind of stuck with this group.
Okay, what can the Clippers trade that gives the Sixers a chance to contend?
All right, well, hold on just one second. So the Clippers I started hearing the vibes Wednesday about the Clippers. And then Wednesday night, the Clippers did not pick up. They released Eric Gordon, which saved them, I believe, 110,
I believe, $110 million in luxury taxes.
And it's possible that they did that move just to save the taxes. It would be the first time that we've seen Steve Ballmer worry about spending, but there is a breaking point for everybody. They're in the repeater tax.
That's a lot of money for a role player.
That's correct. So it may just be that. However, that move got them basically into a spot where if they had to go after Harden in a sign and trade, at least it was possible. It still would take some other action, but the Clippers making that move was an indication that something might be up with them. And so my feel is that they knew that Harden was seriously considering doing something to get out of Philadelphia. Whether it was opting in and trying to walk in a sign and trade, which I thought was a low percentage, and I think he did too, or opting into this contract. So there was momentum headed this way for a while. He didn't do the actual paperwork until the very buzzer, but there was momentum headed this way. When the Suns traded for Bradley Beal, even though the fit isn't perfect, sorry, my phone is just nonstop. Even though the fit is not perfect with Bradley Beal in Phoenix, they couldn't turn down the ability to upgrade. They already were so invested in Booker and Durant. I believe I said in for a penny, in for a pound, using an old man phrase. Okay, so they're like, this is a guy we're going to cut in Chris Paul. I think the Clippers are kind of looking at it similarly. If you look at their roster, they have a bunch of players on expiring contracts that are role players. Some of them are nice players. Some of them are run-of-the-mill players, but they're role players. And James Harden, I'm not sitting here saying, get James Harden, put him next to Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and that's going to challenge the Nuggets, or that's going to challenge the 96 Bulls. But I think the reason that they're looking at it, and the reason that they may explore it, is because the price, the talent upgrade, and what they already have sort of in the middle with this team aligns. And I think that's the direction that they're looking at.
Well, and I do think Harden's a great fit, just for the simple fact, James Harden is a brilliant offensive mind. He is a great, even if he's not a guy who can give you 35 or 40 every single night like he was in the recent past, that dude can run an offense and pass. But my point is, okay, let's say, best case scenario, you're talking about some expiring contracts. Now the Clippers can give a first round pick. Is that correct? Or do they
two firsts? Okay, two firsts and two
let's
firsts
say best
and two
case
swaps.
scenario. Okay, best case scenario. I don't think it'll be that much. Even best case, all that, as much draft capital as they can, expiring contracts, and I'll be very generous and throw Terrence Mann into the deal. That's not a contending team. Now, can Daryl take that and flip it? I never rule out Daryl Morey's ability to make things happen.
Expiring contracts, Tyrese Maxey and several firsts or multiple firsts is the best trade offer for Damian Lillard on the board. So
now that is the one somewhat plausible scenario that I can see for Philly coming out of this thing and arguably being better off right away.
Well, and they might be. And look, I think what I would say is Daryl, as we talked about before, Daryl has shown in the past he's not just going to make a deal right away to make one. And we've all said in different ways, the Clippers and these teams that we're talking about that are over the cap don't have a way to get James Harden. They don't have a way to get a player like that. So you could say the Sixers are sitting here with no leverage. Again, I think the Sixers have all the leverage because they're sitting there with the player who's on a 1-year deal, you can't even extend him anyway, but you're locked in on this deal. And if James Harden goes to your team, he's going to be invested because he's going to want to get paid. And you're talking about these teams that don't have a way to get this kind of player. So I suspect that in the end, whenever this is done, and it might be a while, I think Philly's going to come out of this looking pretty good. Yeah. Because they have a lot. I think they have a lot more leverage than people would think based off the fact that James Harden is sitting here without a clear exit strategy.
I will say, I think Harden to the Knicks would be a poor fit, a bad idea, and the subject of intense internal debate before it happened.
I think the Clippers make more sense. I agree with that. And the Clippers seem like they're being more aggressive.
And remember, the Clippers also were talking about Malcolm Brogdon, at least in some forms, right? I mean, they've been talking about point guards. There obviously was some interest in potentially trying to have a reunion with Chris Paul. That's now off the board. This is something they've been looking at for a while now. So
I don't think you can rule the Knicks out. I know that it doesn't look and make as much sense. I don't think you can rule them out.
No, I'm not saying rule them out. I just don't think would be wise. And I think that there would, like I said, I think it's something that I don't believe there would be a consensus within the Knicks.
Well, think about where the Knicks are. The Knicks were a 5th place team last year. They did beat the 4th place team. Philadelphia in front of them is now shaking a little bit. We'll see where they're at on the other side of this. They could end up on the other side of this and being in good shape. We'll see. I mean, look, here's something about Philadelphia. I'm going to tell you, Tobias Harris was underused last year. He was not underpaid. He was underused. Now, you can say what you're going to say about Tobias Harris, and that's fine. He had the lowest usage rate of any season of his career last season, even less than his rookie year. And then in the playoffs, it was even lower than that. So you can look at Tobias's output and you can say it's not acceptable and everything like that. He was underused. I think no matter what happened, even if James Harden was hugging Daryl Morey and they were drinking brandy in a strip club tonight, celebrating the title or celebrating the contract.
I think James is more of a Don Julio guy, but go on.
Fair point. Tobias Harris is going to get used, I believe, more by Nick Nurse. Okay, so Tobias Harris is underused. Tyrese Maxey might be underused. It's possible that he could be used more. So I don't think this is like the Sixers have a challenge in front of them. I don't think it's a disaster. I think it's an opportunity. They got to hit it. And I go back to the Knicks. Philadelphia is somewhat in flux. Milwaukee, I'm not sure where they're going to be. They still have Giannis, so they're still going to be fine. But we'll see about Milton and Lopez, and we'll see where they are.
If they re-sign those guys, they're going to be right at the top of the conference, or should be. And if they don't, then who knows?
I agree. Yeah. But New York might say this might be a way where we can inject some talent without it being too expensive. They have Evan Fournier's expiring contract, and they got a bunch of first-round picks, and they're not going to have to give 5. By the way, the Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell trades, those are over for right now.
Right.
As I talk to league executives, they're starting to use the phrase "the price of acquisition."
But let's also be clear. The reason those deals are not on the table right now is because basically every team that's in contention for something has made one of those deals already, right? Like that's part of the issue.
The Knicks could trade 5 first-round picks for a player.
Yes, if a player comes along. That if there's a guy like a true like top 5 level guy that pops up on the market,
like a guy who just won the MVP or something like that a year from now, somebody like that.
I'm just saying there are still teams that have the ability to do that, but all the guys we're talking about, whether it's Dame Lillard with $200 million left on his deal at 33, whether it's James Harden at this point in his career, Kyrie Irving has a 1,000 issues. All these guys, for different reasons, have things that are holding back their market, on top of the fact that so many of the teams that might make this kind of deal have already traded a bunch of picks. So there's just no picks left to trade, really.
If the price is right, I think the Knicks would consider it.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it at that. So back to Philly. It may be a 2-step trade. They may find a deal for James Harden, collect whatever they're going to get for him. Maybe it's a draft pick, maybe it's 2, maybe it's expiring contracts. And they could then hold those things and try to go out and do something else. Now, this is where Dame Lillard comes up. I'm going to tell you that if Dame Lillard became available and Philadelphia was able to offer multiple first-round picks, Tyrese Maxey, and expiring contracts, that would be potentially a very compelling offer.
It's almost like somebody said that 10 minutes ago.
Okay.
He's reiterating.
Yes. Thank you. Show some respect.
Why is it reiterate? Do you iterate? Is iterate a word? It is?
Bontemps iterated and I reiterated.
There you go. Good. There you go.
Or they could use them for a player that we don't even see yet.
Or multiple players. I just see
how Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris play for McNurse with Joel Embiid.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. They could add 2 or 3 players. Like that's all I'm saying. To me, I think this of the available options was the best option for Philly, for him to opt in. Now, obviously, it makes for an awkward situation right in this exact moment. But again, if you look at the suite of options, give him like a 3 or 4 year deal, have him leave or opt in and deal with this. If I was choosing one, I would choose this because I think this could end up working out pretty well.
If any GM is comfortable in an awkward situation, it's Daryl.
It's true.
He doesn't, he doesn't get rattled by human element. It's funny that Harden's kind of been his one, I would say, weak spot in that. And clearly that's not the case right now.
Well, look, they've been preparing for this for weeks. They were game theory and game planning this out for weeks, were they not? I mean, he had to recognize this was a possibility.
Months.
Of course.
Months,
they've been doing it. They've been doing it since the deal was signed last July.
Well, and that's the other thing. Like, if you know Daryl Morey, he's got dozens of potential deals out as possibilities already. Like, it's not like Daryl's, oh, wow, we've got to trade James. Okay, let's figure out what some possibilities are. The guy, he's got all his contingency plans laid out well in advance.
Well, so now let's talk about why this could be a circus. So you have 3 point guards that are somewhat up in the air: Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Dame Lillard. Now, Dame passed on a chance to ask for a trade on Monday. As far as I know, tonight, that has not changed. Kyrie Irving is looking for a market. He is looking and trying to create something. The Suns don't realistically have a chance to sign him. There was Chris Haynes reported today that there's going to be a meeting with the Suns. I guess you could get a whiteboard and an abacus and some grease and a bottle of Jack Daniels, and you can
let's just
for that to happen.
Let's just
but
lay
it's
out this.
Not going to happen.
Well, we could say the scenario for that to happen. They'd have to wipe out all the money on their books. DeAndre Ayton, campaign, everybody else. Kyrie would have to do
up campaign's contract.
Right, right. No, I know. Assuming Kyrie is decided for a minimum deal, by the way, or which that could happen. Sure.
I guess we should
acknowledge. Hey, Kyrie, we're offering you.
Sure.
We're offering you 30 some odd, maybe even 40 some odd million less for this season in the Mavs.
Or he could do a sign and trade where you have to do, I believe, a 3-year deal, and it'd have to be under, I think, $16-17 million, somewhere in that ballpark. If they did that and then had every other roster spot be a minimum, they could squeeze them in.
Again, that's because a sign and trade,
hard capped at $172 million.
Right. And Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker are at $130 million and change.
That's right.
So that math is not.
You then would have $42 million to fill out the rest of your roster, and every roster spot that's a minimum is about $2 million. So you start doing the math and you run out of money really fast.
Listen, the simple fact of the matter is, whatever number the Mavericks end up at, it'll be in the ballpark of max, somewhere south, but closer to max than not. There's not another scenario where Kyrie can get that kind of money. But again, the Mavericks, it's not that they're negotiating against another team. I think the worst case scenario for the Mavericks is Kyrie says, damn it, I don't have anything better. I guess I'll take this deal. 3 years, I'm just throwing numbers out now. 3 years, $120 million. Damn, it's a bunch of bull. Signs that contract, and he comes to camp and he's pissed off and he's pouting and he's disgruntled. He feels disrespected. He feels lowballed. It's a repeat of what went down in Brooklyn. That's the worst case scenario. So it's a very delicate. The Mavericks rightfully are confident that they will keep Kyrie Irving, but it is a very delicate situation in exactly how the negotiations unfold.
Well, and I think.
Let me just cover something real quick.
Sure.
Joel Embiid and Kyrie Irving have a relationship. The Sixers are about to make a major move where they're going to move some major money. Now, if you did a sign and trade, you would be hard capped, and the Sixers would have to try to address that. They would have to move their money around a little bit. So it's not as simple. But I just want to be clear. Kyrie doesn't actually have to go to the Sixers. Kyrie just has to credibly threaten to try to get to the Sixers. Mm-hmm. And that might impact how the Mavericks do business, especially a year off of losing Jalen Brunson for nothing.
Oh, no. Yeah, the Mavericks losing Kyrie would be a really, really bad situation for the Mavericks. You cannot lose your second best player in back-to-back summers. It's just bad business, especially as big. Like the losing Brunson led them to make essentially a panic move to get Kyrie in the first place. And now part of the reason the number is so important, it's not just they're trying to squeeze, pennies here. They're trying to preserve their full max. I'm sorry, their full mid-level, that full, which they shaved enough money off on draft night to have that full $12.4 million mid-level. Bruce Brown, primary target. Well, it sounds like Bruce Brown might have a spot where he's going to get more than the full mid-level. I still think there's a chance that Bruce Brown pulls a Bobby Portis and goes back to Denver for significantly less than he could get in the market, $7.8 million. And then, gets made right next summer. I know that obviously Michael Malone's recruiting the hell out of him. Put it this way, that speech he made at the parade, Brucey B, don't leave. That's not the first time that Malone said that in front of his teammates. His teammates have been hitting him up. But anyways, back to the Mavericks. I'm less confident now than even a few hours ago that they're going to be able to get Bruce Brown. Like Dante DiVincenzo would be another guy. That Villanova pull to New York seems pretty strong after Josh Hart did what he did.
But by the way, there's a couple of interesting moves we're going to talk about today. Some real low-key things happened in the NBA already today. And the day.
And so as I'm saying all this, I think that if you're Kyrie, that he's within his rights to say, okay, listen, it's so important for you to preserve the full mid-level, but for who? If we're not going to get Bruce Brown, if we're not going to get a DiVincenzo, like for who? And, maybe the Mavericks, this is just throwing names out that I think would be fits. Maybe the Mavericks say, hey, what we can do is we can split that and bring in Eric Gordon and Taurean Prince. But if you're Kyrie, if I'm taking a little bit less, why? What's it doing for us this season? I think that's a reasonable question for him to ask.
Well, this is where the Kyrie deal, the fact that they made a desperation move in February to trade for him is why they're in a desperate spot now. And it's why, to me, Dallas doesn't have a lot of leverage in this situation because Kyrie, for all of his issues, Dallas has to have him on the team. Like Dallas can't do some sign and trade and get back Flotsam in a trade or some future picks or something if they want to move on from Kyrie, because you've got Luka sitting there, and this was the move to replace the guy, as you both said, Jalen Brunson, who walked out the door a year ago and played like an all-star in New York. And this was the guy to replace him. And if he goes back out the door, there's no way to replace him. So that's why, to your point, Dallas is in the position now with Kyrie as a free agent. They have to figure out a way to not only get him done, but get him done at a number where, like you said, he doesn't come back and feel disgruntled and upset and frustrated. And then it becomes the latest Kyrie circus. Whereas with James Harden, the fact that he's sitting there under contract, it gives Philadelphia, to me, a lot more leverage in that situation to manage it going forward. Even if it is awkward right now, they've got a lot more certainty in where they're going than Dallas does, where they got to juggle a lot of stuff and try to keep him happy.
Well, and especially after draft night, where the Mavericks did good business on draft night, turning 10 into shedding some salary, get him picks 12 and 24. Rashawn Holmes, honestly, I don't know if he's going to be a rotation player or not. He wasn't last year in Sacramento. That was the tax to get 24. I think Derek
had a better chance to be than Davis Bertans, though.
For sure. But still, my point is, essentially, the business you did on draft night was good, but you're bringing in 2 rookies. You're not bringing in immediate help. And the prize of the 2 rookies is a 19-year-old big guy, right? And it's not reasonable to think that Derek Lively, he's not going to be their starting center, certainly early next season. And if he is at any point, he would be well ahead of schedule. So they're going to need a stopgap starting center. My whole point is, when they got 10, and certainly they explored these kind of things, but people thought, okay, the Mavericks are going to try to flip that pick that they tanked to keep for immediate help. And that's not the way that it played out. So I think, you can argue, hey, they took a smart, patient approach, but smart, patient approach, and you lose your second best player, and you really have no realistic hope of doing much of anything next year, leads to a total disaster.
Well, look, the question is that in the James Harden transaction, is it going to end up involving Kyrie? Is it going to end up involving Lillard? And I don't know, but it could. And that's what we're going to watch in the next couple of days. And it might not be the next couple of days.
The Mavericks would have to be dragged into that kicking and screaming, but I'm not saying it's not possible.
I agree. But, the Sixers are in a position where they are now got to maximize the hand that they're holding. Mm-hmm. And maybe
Daryl ain't going to rush into a deal just to get this over with. He's going to get the deal he wants to get.
But how will the Mavericks now handle that hand? Are they in the mood to play hardball like they could be? So we'll see about that. And as for Dame, here's the thing I'm going to say about Dame Lillard. Yes, it's likely that the Blazers would only trade him if he asked for a trade. And maybe even if he asked for a trade and said, I want to go to a certain spot. But it doesn't have to be that way. He is under long-term contract. They could trade him if they saw a deal crop up out of this that they thought was advantageous. They could trade him, especially if they think that they're in a better position to trade him now as opposed to him being coming to them and saying, I want to be traded here and want to sort of help control the terms. So I'm not saying I expect that to happen. I'm just saying that should be thought about. And look, maybe the Harden thing will happen, Kyrie will happen, and then Lillard will be unrelated. But I'm just saying we have potentially 3 star point guards, all of which are in some level of flux. And sometimes we see these deals merge together. So let's just keep an eye on that. A couple of other things I want to talk about that happened in the NBA today. 2 low-key things that I found interesting. One, Josh Hart picked up his contract option for $13 million. This was unexpected with the Knicks. He probably could have gotten more money from the Knicks if he opted out and did a brand new contract. But by doing this, you don't think so?
No. I think he's getting. You think he's going to get more or less the same money, just an extra year down the road. And as you were going to say, this by opting in, it gives the Knicks the ability to use the full mid-level exception. And as MacMahon alluded to earlier, there's a certain other former Villanova Wildcat that's on the market that could be a mid-level player.
We think there's a good chance Dante DiVincenzo could end up in New York to play with his former Villanova teammates, Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart. And Josh Hart handled this contract today in a way that helped make it more possible. That's what
by the way, like we talked about on the pod on Sunday, the fact that he pushed back with mutual agreement with the Knicks, pushed back his option on this contract by several days first, then opts in, certainly makes you go, why would he do that? As somebody would say.
Can we get the call logs of Josh Hart's cell phone? Were there any calls placed to DiVincenzo?
Nobody calls him when they just text. Also,
the Nova group text.
Something interesting happened in New Orleans. The Pelicans could have paid Herb Jones $1.9 million this year. And at the conclusion of this upcoming season, he would have been a restricted free agent where they could have matched all offers. Mm-hmm. Kind of seems like a no-brainer. Why would you not pay a really good perimeter defender who's an improving player, a really core pep of your team, why wouldn't you pay him $2 million and then have him restricted in a year? They did not pick up that team option on him, and he is now a free agent, a restricted free agent now. That is interesting.
Surprising.
Why does that make sense?
Here's why I think so. I think Herb Jones will probably be re-signing with the Pelicans in the near future. The most he can get from the Pelicans is 4 years and $53 million, which would mean that he would earn $12 million this year instead of earning $2 million this year. $10 million more in this season. That's good, especially for a young man who's only made a couple of $1 million in the first couple of years of his career. Now, again, why would they do that? Because if he became a free agent next year, even though he would have been restricted, he wouldn't have been tied into the limitations of what he could be offered by other teams. Like, this is a situation with Austin Reeves with the Lakers. He's played for 2 years. He's a restricted free agent. The Lakers can match, but other teams are limited in how much they can offer him in the first 2 years of that contract. So I think the Pelicans are saying, we think that he could get paid more than 4 years and $54 million next year. So we're going to take the opportunity to lock him into this contract now, as opposed to potentially paying more for him next year. And his reward for that is he gets to make $10 million more now. So
and he'll get to free agency a year earlier down the road.
I guess. I don't think this is very good cap management, but
this deal, if constituted like we just said, will take the Pelicans deep into the luxury tax. Pelicans are one of two teams that have never paid the luxury tax. The other being the Charlotte Bobcat Hornets. They actually were both the Hornets, but whatever. So I think the Pelicans have another move that will come to dump salary in addition to this Herb Jones move, which I think that portended. And so there's going to be a whole bunch of deals happen.
Just for clarity's sake, they'd be close to the tax. They wouldn't be way into it. Like, I think they could make some moves on the margins and maybe get out of it without having to do something drastic. If it's the way we laid out, I'm just for.
I think at the moment they're just below the tax, and if they give them a $10 million raise, they'd be well into it.
I'm looking at the numbers, and they'll if they give him that deal, they'll be with cap holds, they'll be bumping up against the tax. Might be into it by a little bit. So I just looked it up while you were talking.
Another move that was interesting, a little bit higher in the Western Conference standings. Harrison Barnes getting a deal done to stay in Sacramento. Certainly, Wendy, you were the first one to jump on this when they made the move on draft night to essentially dump Rashawn Holmes and pay the number 24 pick to Dallas, to do so. It looked like they might be some pretty major free agency players. Maybe not. Apparently not.
Yeah, I would say this rules that out, basically.
So why did they trade a first-round pick?
To dump salary?
And that dump salary achieved?
Well, it will give them the ability to re-sign these guys and renegotiate and extend Sabonis. They can re-sign Trey Lyles. They can bring over Sasha Vezenkov.
They had the rights on all those guys.
Yeah, but they'll be under the cap now, and they can be under the cap and then renegotiate and extend Sabonis. Whereas if they had kept Rashawn Holmes, they would have been an over the cap team, and they wouldn't have been able to do that. That'll be the one benefit if they go this route.
I don't think so, because Barnes took a pay cut, so they would have generated cap space in that way.
But
Barnes signed right about at the same number. He was 18.3 last year. He signed a 3-year, $54 million deal.
It's they removed not only did they remove the money from Holmes, they also removed the potential money they're going to give the 24th. It's like $15 million off their books. That gives them the ability to.
All right, let's not analyze it too much, but I was surprised. Okay, and like that's the same thing. Like I'm not 100% clear about that deal. Plus, if the Mavericks don't end up getting their mid-level exception, they'll move Davis Bertans off and not really been able to immediately realize the advantages of that. So,
they realized some advantages of it because by moving Bertans, they opened up. First of all, they got the guy they wanted at 10 regardless.
Yep.
And then they opened up that trade exception, that trade exception is what they took Holmes into and got that 24th overall pick. So moving Bertans at least allowed them to get the 24th overall pick. And then they got Omax Prosper, who is a Dorian Finney-Smith type of guy.
That's correct.
So, maybe you can say they didn't maximize it depending on how things play out, but they did benefit from it.
That's true. I take it back. I forgot that they got that pick. All right. So I have heard how many we've had in our text. We're not going to be able to save most of these, but how many deals do we think we've heard of being done already? 15?
I was going to say more a dozen plus.
Yeah. So we're going to see a bunch of stuff get done at the deadline tomorrow. I mean, at the opening of it. One of the big things that will happen is if Fred VanVleet does indeed take the money in Houston, the fallout with potential guys who are waiting on potential offers from Houston, and the fallout in Toronto, where, if indeed the Rockets are willing to go to the max, which is $40 million, give or take, for Fred VanVleet, I don't have a problem with the Raptors not matching that. But it calls into question the Raptors' strategy with Fred VanVleet over the last year, including at the trade deadline. And it calls into question their strategy for the last couple of years where they've managed their roster. I don't know what they're doing. They're kind of just spinning their wheels.
Well, and then would that be the domino that would push them into saying, okay, we lost VanVleet. It's going to be really tough to be competitive right now. Let's strip down and rebuild around, Scotty Barnes in particular. But in other words, hey, there's Anunoby teams. There's several teams that would love to have Anunoby. Do we need to restart those conversations? Siakam. Yeah.
So that's a fallout. The other thing is, like, Brook Lopez was a guy that Houston was, I believe, considering. In Sacramento was Bontemps. I don't know if they ever seriously considered it, but I thought Brook Lopez would have been interesting for Sacramento. Both of those doors may have been closed if VanVleet does this. Does that increase his situation to go back to Milwaukee, and does that affect the price?
Well, and our buddy Mac 10 mentioned Lopez as a Lakers target with their full mid-level. I can't imagine that the Bucks wouldn't beat that offer. Not that they have the right to match, but
I think if Brook was taking that, it'd be because he'd want to go live by Disneyland, and he would be frustrated with how that I say half jokingly, but I'm sure he would, and also he would be frustrated with how the Bucks had handled things at that point, right? And
reunite with Darvin Ham and all that kind of stuff.
Well, right. I mean, Darvin certainly is a guy who's a sales pitch there. I mean, look, if I'm the Bucks, I'm pretty frustrated with how these negotiations for Nick Vucevic went. Because if I'm Brook Lopez, I'm going to the Bucks. I'm saying I ain't taking $1 less than 3 for $60. Like, I'm a better player than Nick Vucevic. Whatever the price was,
he's a more valuable player. I mean,
I'd just say he's a flat out better player. I don't think if you just put those guys on the open market and say who's the better player, I think most teams are going to say Brook Lopez. And again, if we talk about leverage, right? In that situation, if I'm Brook Lopez, I'm saying, hey, if I leave, what are you guys doing here?
If he leaves, they're in trouble. And we talked about that before, because it ain't about necessarily Brook Lopez. It's about Bucks aren't going to be championship contenders if they lose Lopez. Right. And if they're not championship contenders, then
what?
Who another guy would be worth throwing all the Knicks picks into the pot for? I think that guy.
There you go. So again, he's got a lot of leverage to get that done. does that get done? And like I said, if I'm Brook Lopez and Darren Matsubar, his longtime agent, I'm looking at the Vooch deal and I'm saying, hey, 3 for $60, like we're starting there. And if you guys don't like it, then
right. And who can offer him $20 million at this point? If Houston does this deal, who's offered him $20 million? I guess possibly San Antonio. His arc doesn't match theirs, but San Antonio needs a center.
Maybe a nice fit with Victor. I mean,
San Antonio's does have Zach Collins. They're not desperate for a center.
Well, they got a lot of cap space. They got to spend it on somebody.
Well, not necessarily. They can rent it.
Well, I'm just saying they got to spend it somehow. They could spend it a lot of different ways, but they got to spend it on something. I'm just saying, Brook Lopez, if Brook Lopez gets and this is where I'm going back to with the Lakers, right? I assume Brook Lopez is going to wind up eventually in Milwaukee on a deal. But if they say we don't want to take less money than Nick Vucevic and the Bucks play hardball with them, and he says, well, the hell with it. I'll just go play somewhere else for less money instead. Like you said, MacMahon, they don't have the ability to just match any offer if he gets annoyed with how it's going. So that's, they're in a delicate spot. And like I said, if I'm the Bucks and I'm sitting there and I see that deal, I'm sure they weren't thrilled because it's not a good negotiating position for them at the exact same position to have that guy sign that deal 2 days before free agency starts.
Yeah, well, so we've been talking throughout this discussion about guys who don't really have markets or are sort of, trying to gain leverage without really having other offers. Another guy that I think is going to be interesting is going to be D'Angelo Russell.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he has value to the Lakers, but I don't know who's offering him a significant contract when he made $30 million last year.
Who's offering him more than the mid-level?
I don't see that, which is why I wonder if the Lakers will.
Yeah, I can't name a name or a team. I asked you guys, have you heard anything on Russ? I don't know. No, I'm talking about Russell Westbrook, not D'Angelo Russell. I don't know where his next deal is coming from.
Well, he could back up James Harden, theoretically. They've played together before.
Twice. The second time was very brief and ended with mutual trade requests.
All right. We're going to have a lot to talk about.
By the way, Kyle Kuzma is another one. I'm not sure where.
Yeah, that's right.
We thought Utah, that option is kind of off the table. We thought maybe Sacramento, they're sticking with Barnes. We'll see.
A real theme has been that there's just a lot of guys looking around trying to find leverage, and there's not a lot of leverage. And I do think we should touch on before we go, because we sort of talked around it a little bit, Brian, is this Bruce Brown situation. He's obviously got a ton of suitors around the league. A lot of people interested in him. I mean, you mentioned it, man. He could, in theory, do with the quote unquote Bobby Portis and go back to Denver on a smaller deal. I think the thing to remember with that is in his entire career, Bruce Brown has made like $13 or $14 million total to this point. When Bobby Portis had done that, he'd already made almost 30 and had already had a year in his career when he made $15 million with the Knicks. Right. So like it would be
7.8 million this year. And then they could offer him next summer in the range of 60 over 4.
Well, but
he might get that this summer.
Well, that's the thing. A full mid-level deal, you're talking close to that this summer for a guy who's never made any money. That would be
and if it's the Pacers, it would be for more than full mid-level.
Right. So then you're talking even more than that. So if that's the case, it's hard for me to see a guy in that position walking away from that kind of money. I mean, if he does, good for him. I mean, I thought last summer when they signed, it'd be a great fit. Obviously, it was better than anybody could have guessed. He was incredible in Denver. It'd be cool if he was back there, but it's just going to be tough, I think, for them to do that with the amount of money he's going to be able to get from other places.
Yeah, I agree. And I've been under the assumption for months that there's no way he'd be back in Denver. I've softened that just based on, conversations I've had today. And like I said, the Nuggets, they know what they're up against.
Sure,
they understand the money and the math and all that.
Well, if he leaves, Michael Malone's can wipe their eyes with diamond encrusted fingers.
This is true. And he'll get his when he comes back to Denver with whoever it is this season.
That's right.
Before we go, Bontemps, you flew up to Boston for the day to go to Chris Porzingis press conference.
I didn't think we were going to talk about this.
Employee number 8, baby.
What did you take away from that? He was pretty enthusiastic.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I still can't wrap my head around this trade. It's one of the most fascinating trades I can remember. I'm really excited to watch Boston this year because they are going to be such a different team with Porzingis instead of Marcus Smart, and like all the various things that's going to change about their group, both from a locker room standpoint and on-court standpoint and on-court style standpoint. But MacMahon spent a lot of time around Porzingis in Dallas. I was around him early in his career when he was in New York. And it was interesting to hear him talk today and see how excited he was about being in Boston. And it felt like a guy who had, over the last couple of years, seen his star drop in a lot of ways quite a bit and be excited about the fact that a really good team that's got a chance to win a championship sort of prioritized going to get him, right? I mean, we're talking about a guy that, 16, 17 months ago. I mean, I don't know if it was quite a salary dump, but
it was a straight up salary dump to the point where the Mavericks gave up a second round pick to do it and took back 2 contracts that the Wizards desperately wanted to get off of. One of them
they just got off of in a draft by moving down in the draft in Davis Bertans, right? It was Davis Bertans and Spencer Dinwiddie.
And Dinwiddie. And Dinwiddie had a bad go in Washington, and which he's made clear many times, as has Kuzma. But yeah, it was like somebody's willing to take him without us giving up a first round pick to get off him. Here you go.
Right. So you go from being the guy in Dallas who's traded to be with Luka as the second star, and like Luka and Kristaps are going to be the guys, and we're going to, compete for titles here.
They're going to be together for 20 years, Mark Cuban declared during his intro presser in Dallas.
Right. So you go from that to getting
salary.
He might
have said 20 months. I'd have to go back and review that.
But you go from that to getting salary dumped to Washington, being on a completely irrelevant Wizards team this year. Had a great season with the Wizards, was healthy, played really well, had some great games against Boston, ironically. But completely irrelevant. And it was interesting just to hear him talking about how excited he was. And I thought the other thing he said that was really interesting was that, somebody asked him, do you feel like you're heading into your prime of your career? And he said he was, and he talked a lot about the fact that he's really grown a lot, both mentally and physically. And he felt like he's entering the prime years of his career in both of those aspects, and talked a lot about the fact that he's learned a lot from when he was 21 or 23 or 25. And thinks he's a different guy now. And look, it's easy to say all that stuff in July, and we'll see where things are at in March and April and May. This is a guy who's played 10 career playoff games. He's now on a team that is going to be expecting to be competing for a championship. He's replacing a guy that was a icon in Boston in a lot of ways, in Marcus Smart. That's going to be a big thing to deal with. So there are a lot of questions about the fit, about all of it, but I do think from an overall talent standpoint, Boston did raise their championship ceiling with this move. And I think with Porzingis, if he embraces this with the approach he had today and how he talked about it today, it could work out really well for the Celtics. But I'm really curious to see if it goes that way or not.
They have to extend them, right? I mean, they didn't trade Marcus Smart for a 1-year rental.
I would suspect he will be on an extension at some point. Brad Stevens was asked about it and said they're still talking about things and they haven't got anything done, but I would guess at some point there will be an extension.
They traded Marcus Smart for 2 first-round picks.
What'd you say, Tim?
I said they traded Marcus Smart for 2 first-round picks as well, but the same.
They did.
They had discussions about trading Malcolm Brogdon before. That is still out there. They have Grant Williams as a restricted free agent. That is still out there. Celtics are not done. They've got some more work to do on this roster, plus the Jaylen Brown extension, which I suspect will get done. All right, when we come back to you tomorrow, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's happened. We'll take a look at it. Who knows what will happen on the Harden front. obviously the Sixers could take their time here. It wouldn't surprise me if they did, but I expect this to happen reasonably soon. So we'll see if I'm right. We'll see if I'm wrong. Thank you, Mr. Bontemps. Thank you, Mr. MacMahon. Thank you, Jackson, our producer. Thank you for listening to Hoop Collective. We'll talk to you tomorrow/Saturday.
Adios, amigos.